Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so thrilled to be joined by Sam Reid to talk all about his latest series, Interview with a Vampire. And I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the preparation and development part of the process for you in getting this role, because, you know, it sounds like even though you've done incredibly complex roles before, that this was just another layer on top of that with everything that you had to do. And even just starting with the fact that there's thousands of pages of literature to really dive into this character and learn all of his backstory and all of the subtext, supplementing the scripts, you know, to learning French, piano, singing in the show. And so I was really interested in, when you have such an seemingly insurmountable task ahead of you like that, with so many different facets that you're trying to master in a short space of time, kind of what was your starting point and how you really navigated it in a way that felt manageable for you?
It's a very good question, because it never feels manageable, but it's such a fantastic role that it's always very exciting to approach it on any given day. But I guess I had read the books before, you know, when I was younger, and so I had a innate understanding of the characters through my own appreciation of the books. But I guess the first thing I did was go back to the books sort of straight away and kept reading and reading and reading and reading. And it's a different thing when you're approaching a character, or looking at a source material when you're approaching it as an actor portraying that character. It's very different to just reading them as a fan of the books, because you have to start to find a voice. But she's very specific about the way she describes him, and he is very specific about the way he describes himself, and all the other characters are very specific about the way they describe Lestat. So, and then also, you know, Anne did countless interviews where she talks about this character. She talks about his nature. She talks about, you know, how he pronounces his name. You know, she does a lot of things that I was just, you know, straight up going to in the very beginning. And then, you know, Roland has just done this amazing job of translating all of that, and translating this character, and also finding the character that she sort of settled on, because he does change from Interview with the Vampire to the Vampire Lestat. And so he sort of, you know, he took elements from both, because we're still seeing it from Louis' perspective, and there still has to be a certain amount of anguish and resentment in the way that Lestat is described versus the way that Lestat perhaps describes the things himself. But yeah, it was, you know, Roland, the way he incorporated the language, Anne Rice's language, into the actual dialogue. So you can go back to the scene in the book and see the way that they were thinking, and making sure every reference, you know, I just say a small line in passing, but, you know, fans of the books, or myself as an actor taking on the role, knew the meaning behind it. And so you don't have to create the story. You have it there. You have it in your back pocket at all times. And then there was, you know, piano, French lessons, Italian lessons, you know, and I just kept doing that throughout the whole process, which was daunting, but I was sort of adamant that I wanted them to be there. I wanted those elements to be there in the character. Yeah.
And I love the specificity of, like you said, Roland taking the language from the books. And it's a character who has a very specific way of speaking because of his worldview and because of his experience, you know, the time period of where the show is set, but also his history for how long he's been alive for. You know, and there's also that element of delivering dialogue that's about things that are very outside of the ordinary of our day-to-day world. And so how did you kind of manage and navigate, firstly, the fact that you're going in and filming the show where every couple of days you've got pages and pages of monologues that you're delivering in this very specific dialect, but also always finding the way to make it feel very grounded through your character, even when it's out of the ordinary moments for him?
Yeah, it's another really great question. I appreciate these. I guess you have to always look at the circumstance like it's truthful. So it would be not beneficial to me to dwell too much on how otherworldly this experience is, because it is his experience. And I think the way that Anne subverts the monster culture and subverted vampirism by putting yourself in the position of the vampire, you immediately have an emotional connection and an empathy for these creatures. It's the same thing, you know, that Mary Shelley does with Frankenstein, and it's within that tradition. So, you know, you have to look at these things as very everyday. It's something that you do on a daily basis, kill. And so it's how do I make killing interesting? How does Lestat make killing interesting for himself? And how does he make this experience important? Because, you know, his history is, when he's met the other vampires in his past, it's been a lot more about shame, and that, you know, you are acting as a servant of Satan, and what you are is wrong. And Lestat, you know, when he was an actor. He wanted to see the world. He left home to go to Paris. He had his whole life in front of him, and it was taken away from him. And I think he's always trying to get his life back. He's always trying to go step back into the spotlight and take ownership and make the best of it. And he redefines vampire culture within the world of Anne Rice as well. So, you know, I guess that's a roundabout way of saying that it's all about looking for the empathy within the monster. Yeah.
And did those elements that you're describing also really help when it came to finding those aspects of humanity, and like his human self that still lives within him, and it's still a presence, even though he's become this other version as a vampire? Because I think that's something where you really capture the way that it's kind of always simmering underneath the surface. And then there's ways that it tries to really root up, you know, even just his massive yearning for love, or the way that he talks about loneliness over the course of decades. That's very humanistic in terms of his outrage.
Yeah, and it is. And you know, as a character, he has a huge existential crisis as a human being, in which art pulls him out of it. The music, the violin, and listening to that pulls him out of it. So that is his anchor point, is art and aesthetics, and that's his echo basically of humanity. And so moving in, being a monster, that's the only thing that he really, really appreciates in humanity and wants to protect that. I forgot the second part of your question, or the most part of your question. That was my introduction to your question.
No, it was definitely in line with that, and just very much about like the humanity and the aspects of that are always simmering there, and then where you want to bring it to the surface as well.
I mean, and the loneliness is a huge part of it, because they are very lonely creatures. They do live forever. He's not, you know, he goes through patches where he's a bit of a lone wolf, but really he wants companionship, and he is looking for companionship and someone who's going to have the test of time to stick it out with him. But, you know, he is complicated, and he's not easy to be around. And so, you know, that's a very human experience, wanting to be liked, wanting to be loved, wanting to be appreciated. And I think, you know, the limited moments when you do see that his humanity is there is often not what he says, but in his actions. He's very powerful, and he's choosing not to use all of his powers to try and not appear to be in an imbalance in the relationship between Louis and himself. And so, you know, even though at times he might be coming across really extreme, he's actually doing probably the lightest version of what he could be doing.
I think that's a great point as well, even in terms of he's not always easy to be around, and he can be difficult in different ways. And some of that even comes down to his expression of love, and he just doesn't quite have the tools to express it in a traditional sense. And it often comes out in quite a sadistic manner. And so how did you want to encapsulate and really portray that idea of, you know, these are sadistic actions and these are sadistic words that he's expressing, but actually underneath that is a longing for love he's really trying to push through?
Well, he's a vampire, you know, and murder is his love language, you know, in a way. And it's intrinsic in all vampires, this yearning, this desire, this love. I mean, it's sort of part of their lore. You know, you have it in Dracula, you have it in Nosferatu, you have it in Lestat. They're dying, they're endlessly longing to be reunited with their love, and they're aching over centuries. And what I think is really interesting just on that point, actually, is that Anne Rice has this extraordinary ability to reference that culture as well, to reference vampire media, to reference, you know, that. And so I do like to think that maybe he was aware of his own irony, that he was filling the shoes of a vampire, you know, quite well. Yeah.
And then obviously there is a real love and intimacy that comes, between the dynamic with the two of them from the fact that he turns him. And then even, you were talking before about the ritual of feeding and how for him he's kind of stepping outside of a place of shame. And so how did you kind of land upon what you felt like that was in terms of an emotional plane for him as a character, so that when we see that those scenes and those moments where it's just time really slows down, he's savoring every moment, and the pacing of the scene also just really drops? Like, how did you land upon those specific choices?
I mean, a lot of it was working with Roland and his dialect, his dialogue. But also it's important to remember that he does a lot of things for a reaction. He's always trying to, if he's being watched, he's a performer and he's trying to entice Louis into this lifestyle. It's hard to know, and it's something that I question all the time, how much he really enjoys it. He's going to have to find a way to get through it, and that's by embracing who he is and making the best of the situation and making it fucking fantastic, and so he wants to take the time to do that. And if you're going to kill somebody, you have a choice. You either just kill them indiscriminately and quickly and without flair, or you make their life mean something, and you do it with care and delicacy and finesse, I suppose. And I think this is a really key thing to Lestat, is that he loves first. So he falls in love with people and characters, and there's a lot of the books, they sort of start with Lestat falling in love with someone, and then the way that he goes about acquiring that love and the return of the love is sadistic and is violent and is obsessive. And I think that's unfortunately his tragic flaw, is he doesn't know how to just I think he's afraid of somebody not loving him for who he is, really. And so he acts out and pushes them, he forces them to love him.
And he's emotionally quite volatile as a character as well.
Yeah.
It's like he can flip to anger very quickly. It's like, you're not doing this the way that I think that you should be doing it based on my experience. And, he goes from like real tenderness in one moment to real frustration, to real anger, to kind of almost comedy and laughter, to a performance, but also that's requiring all of that from you in scenes and making very fast transitions between those different spaces. Was that something where, you played any other characters that have required those sort of emotional trajectories to shift so quickly, and how would you approach a lot of that, because it is quite a challenge to go so far into those extremities so quickly?
Yeah, no, I've never had the opportunity to play somebody like Lestat, and it's one of the greatest gifts I could ever be given as an actor. Really, it's such a joy. It's so much fun to do. I can't begin. But it's how do you approach it? I guess it's that's just the way he operates, and he is oscillating, and that's just who he is. So it's not really necessarily any specific way of approaching, as it is just accepting.
Did you always have a sense, based on Roland's writing, was it always very clear the different directions that was going to take you emotionally for him as a character in scenes? No. Or were there times where it was helpful to try different versions of it a little bit?
Yeah, I really tried as many different versions of it as I possibly could, sometimes much to the chagrin of the directors. But I needed to try it a bunch of different ways to see which one was going to work, because this is the only problem when the writing is so good, is that there's not one way to do it. There's so many ways to do it. It's so incredibly written. There's so much nuance in it that you could pull out and emphasize different things, and you'd find a completely new thing. So I tried to do it as many possible ways as I could, and and then left it to the editors and everyone else to decide.
I mean, and speaking of moments where it, I was interested whether it was helpful to, especially to really explore different directions, was the moment where he is turning Louis. And so I was interested in how you and Jacob Anderson really figured out what that scene was going to look like, because it's such a pivotal moment. It's something that obviously anyone with familiarity, already that moment's coming. But it really has to land for the audience to kind of see this connection. And then, like you said, even with the volatility later, we understand the connection between the two of them at every stage, because it's such a unique intimacy that's built in that moment.
Yeah. Well, so they're both at this moment where, Louis turns to God, which is very frustrating for Lestat, because you after all of this that you've gone through, you go to God. I mean, it's he has a very complicated relationship with God, which, in later books, he has a really interesting connection with him. And so in response to that, Lestat lays himself totally bare and is the most vile and disgusting and aggressive and nasty he can be. And it's probably too far of an extreme. But he realizes, okay, now Louis has seen me at the worst I can be, and he's technically, seen him the worst he can be. So they've seen each other. They've dealt with how bad it can be. Now, can you love me still, and will you join me forever, still? And I think it just goes to show the intensity of their connection as vampire and human before he's turned, that he will. He also sees Louis. And he shows Louis that he is seen and loved, and they're outsiders. They're both of them outsiders, and they're looking to build a home. And I think, it was a challenging scene to shoot, because we had multiple special effects and stunts within this very large speech, that you had to sort of break up and distinguish, certain beats. So it was, we shot it over a number of days, and you had to make decisions there that were going to last, throughout the whole series. There's even specific ones like, how much blood do you drink to drain a body? Like, how long does that take? What does it look like to suck blood out of somebody? Like, what is that? So there are a lot of kind of big things that we were making, big choices we were making.
I also love a lot of the very specific body language that the two of you have, and the way that touch is used in very different facets. Like even there's one scene where, you've got your hand just gently on the back of Jacob's neck, and you're kind of stroking it as you're talking to him very quietly about feeding, and, it's best to let the food come to you.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like such a great choice. And there's so many instances of that. And so how did the two of you find what you wanted the tactile element of their relationship to be, especially when it is something where they're around other people and there's a little bit more of a quietness, but again, just really that connectivity coming through the way that they move with one another?
Yeah, I mean, they particularly Lestat, can't get his hands off Louis, and so he's always drawn to him, it was, I think, also having the acrylic nails does animate your hands in a way that I wasn't expecting, and all of a sudden I had these weapons on my hands that changed the way that you did something. So, a touch which might also be incredibly gentle is also quite forceful and powerful. And so there's always this element to the way that he's operating, is he's like gently, floating through spaces, but knowing that, he could destroy everything at a second. And that's power, I suppose, in a way. Yeah.
And with that idea of power as well, there's a real poise to him as a character. And again, it feels like part of that comes from the power that you're describing, and part of it also just comes from how we feel like he was as a human, and how he moved as a human through the world as well. And so how did you determine that kind of poise? And was that something where, as well, the external facets of the costume and the hair and the makeup once you were on set really helped in kind of leaning into that as well?
Yeah, and I don't know if he's always been like how he is, or I think he changes, and he does oscillate quite a lot, and he's got a very large arc. I think he is performative. That is his being. He's a performer, and he in a lot of ways I think of him like a frustrated actor or a frustrated performer, because he's got to hide. And so, you know, and it's frustrating when you just want to be on stage. You just want to be in, you know, in front of everyone, and you can never really admit your true nature because, you know, it's something that cannot be discussed, which is why it's so extreme what Louis is doing with releasing this book, and, you know, as we go. And with the costumes, it's interesting because, you know, he is a man, you know, of the 1700s. He's got his element, you know, the 1790s. He's got more flair, more flamboyance in his clothes, and so fitting into the 1900s, the 1910s, 1920s, where men's clothes were much more formal and suits. It was a challenge to be like, where do we find Lestat in this? Like, where is Lestat in these clothes? Like, what is it? And, you know, Carol Cutshall, who's the costume designer, and I would talk a lot about this, and she had this fantastic idea, which was, let's bring in elements that are hidden under the costume, so you don't quite see it. But so, you know, he's wearing the more like really cinched waist, or he's wearing patent leather shoes, you know, or he, like, you know, makes fun of the you know, with his boater hat, and he's sort of like there's a lot of cheeky elements and elements of bondage, you know, where there'll be straps on the suit that he's kind of had custom made to make it look like, you know, he's in something, you know, more menacing, more terrifying, and also, you know, playing with those clothes. And the contact lenses, they're kind of a strange experience because vampires have extraordinary sight and have an amazing ability to see things in extreme detail, and the contact lenses take all the detail away from you, so you can't really see anything. So it's challenging. You really have to use your imagination when you're wearing them, but also they provide so much. They really provide a real sense of otherness to them, so they definitely outweigh the balance. Yeah.
And with the fact that vampires have such a keen sense of sight as well, and can see so much detail, you know, there really is an incredible amount of your performance that rests on your eyes in a lot of different ways. It's, you know, I'm having an entire conversation with Louis, but I'm not actually saying any words out loud that anyone else can hear. So that's really relying on that expression. You know, there's the observational quality that you were mentioning as well, you know, and even just the way that he's kind of like seeking out and honing in on, you know, okay, where is my next feed coming from is another dynamic. And so did you find that it was a performance that lent on that part of you in expression wise in a very different way, and a lot more than other parts as well?
I mean, you mean with the eyes? Yeah. But and so it's confronting when I first put them on, you know, then these beautiful hand-painted custom-made lenses, and I first put them on and I said, Roland, I don't know if I can do this because so much of this happens from the eyes. And he said, you know, trust me, that it doesn't translate like that. And what I did find was incredibly useful is that because you have something on over your irises, you think you don't need to blink, so you can keep your eyes open for a very long time, and you can really stare somebody out for a very long time and realize that you've done like a 3-minute scene without blinking. And you know, it's so useful because they are, as you say, like apex predators, always watching, always honing in on the deeper level on their victim or whoever they're speaking to, because they're listening to how they're really feeling. They're hearing their heartbeat, they're hearing their thoughts, they're watching their prey.
Yeah, no, it felt like there were so many moments where it really just kind of like slows down and we see you watching everything. I mean, it's such a fantastic performance. I love the first few episodes. Congratulations on the season 2 renewal that already came through. I'm so excited that we get more of it. And thank you so much, Sam. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thanks, Mara.